Alright boys, saddle up and get your rituals ready. Because we are back with Dawn of War 2, this time with its first expansion, Chaos Rising. And hey, it only took me 6 months. For the guy who just asked where Chaos Rising is and why I left you hanging so long, I apologise, we're here now. Now before we go on, if you'd like to hear what I think of the base game, then there's a link to that video in the description. Released in 2010, Chaos Rising reintroduced the Chaos Space Marines and the daemons they made their bed with in a brand new campaign that directly follows the events of Dawn of War 2. It was of course created by Relic Entertainment, who really were at the top of their game at this point, riding high on the successes of Dawn of War 2 and Company of Heroes. Chaos Rising aimed to improve on its predecessor in a lot of ways. A new campaign would build upon its addicting and acclaimed gameplay, while significantly moving forward its mission design and story presentation. A new faction would add complexity to skirmish and multiplayer, with a completely new roster of units and commanders. And fresh units for all of the existing factions would make sure that those who preferred their units less corrupted wouldn't be feeling left out. And to increase the potential player pool, Chaos Rising would come packaged as a standalone title, retailing for nearly half the price of Dawn of War 2. A strategy that had clearly paid off for Relic, looking at their history with Company of Heroes. On launch, Chaos Rising received pretty great reviews all around, with most people calling it superior, if not at least equal to its predecessor. And its success led to the eventual release of the final expansion, Retribution, and we'll be covering that one later this year. Hit subscribe and the bell if you want to be notified as soon as that goes live. I promise it'll be less than 6 months away. If you watched my original video on Dawn of War 2, you'll know that while I had a few issues and sticking points with the campaign, overall I thought it was pretty great. Maybe not a great sequel to the original Dawn of War, but great on its own. But today we've moved on from that. Now the question is something entirely different. Was Chaos Rising really a great sequel to Dawn of War 2? Does it hold up today? And most importantly, should you spend your time on it? With the myriad of other options out there, is it still worth it? Well, sit back, relax, and let's find out. Chaos Rising picks up right where Dawn of War 2 left off. The Bloodravens have successfully held off the Orcs and the Eldar and put an end to the Tyranid incursion that threatened the entirety of
Subsector Aurelia.
But it came with significant cost, with the deaths of many a Bloodraven Space Marine and the loss of the strike cruiser Armageddon. But as we all know, there's never a dull day in the life of a Bloodraven Space Marine, and just as one threat is dealt with, another emerges. Without warning, the 1,000-year lost planet of Aurelia spews forth from the warp, bringing with it not only endless questions, but also a host of Chaos forces who now reside on the planet, ready to take the sector for themselves. And they're led by none other than Eliphas, the man who led the forces of Chaos in the Dark Crusade years earlier. Well actually, they were led by Aragast the Pillager, self-proclaimed Lord and Champion of the Black Legion, but partway through the campaign Eliphas actually betrays Aragast, so he becomes the new leader and prime target for yourself and the rest of the Ravens. Sorry, just had to point that out there for you writing in the comments. Before that, however, many a battle occurs with the Chaos forces, and near the start of our story we're introduced to Jonah Orion, a chapter librarian who's more than happy to follow and fight alongside you against the heretics. But after aiding other human factions in the sector, it becomes clear that there is a traitor within your ranks. And throughout the campaign you'll work to uncover information about the identity of said turncoat, and, Emperor willing, rid the sector of Chaos once and for all. I won't go any further into the story right now, at the risk of spoiling the game's best reveals and developments for anyone out there who's yet to play it for themselves, and perhaps wants to after watching this video, but Chaos Rising does a lot to keep its narrative interesting, and having the ending and outcomes be determinant on your choices throughout the game is a massive contributor in that regard. Because of the Chaos influence inherent in doing battle with their forces, the game employs mechanics that steer your squad to or from that direction, and the choices you make throughout the game's missions will decide how your story ends. Now I'm going to talk briefly here about the ending and the campaign traitor because I really like how it plays out and I'd like to discuss it a bit. so skip to this timecode if you don't want to be fully spoiled. So, in my playthrough, I chose to aim for full chaos, but I clearly didn't go far enough as I actually only landed on the neutral ending. So if you don't know, there are 5 endings in total, and mine resulted in the commander being banished from the chapter and exiled for 100 years to pay for his sins with blood. Whether that's his or his enemies, that's not important. Going hard into purity or corruption can give 2 possible endings for each. Full purity makes you and your squad agents of purification, and the commander becomes brother captain of the 4th company. And the lesser purity ending, good but not great, results in Gabriel being proud of you, but you and him are still marked as renegades by the Bloodravens chapter master. Damn Kairos. At the other end of the spectrum, the lower corruption ending sees you meet the flat end of Gabriel's hammer, and full corruption sees you become the Chaos Lord of the Aurelian Black Legion. Cool. I really loved reading back on these possible endings, and it made me realise just how much I had to do to get those chaos options, and how much making a lot of those possible choices in-game mattered. I thought I was really trying to go full chaos, but clearly I wasn't even close. Just another reason to replay it, I guess. Now, there's also the matter of uncovering the traitor inside the Bloodravens, and it turns out that it can actually be anyone, except for yourself and Thule, for obvious reasons, with the final result being based on who is the most corrupt at the end of the game. The only way to secure all of your squad's loyalty is to have them all be entirely pure, in which case the traitor will be Tecmarine Martellus. For the canonical traitor, well, that comes in Retribution. Okay, it's Avitus. Avitus, you dog, you dare flirt with the agents of chaos. I can't believe that you Right, anyways, I think the narrative in Chaos Rising is much improved here over the original game, and honestly, I really enjoyed it. In Dawn of War 2, I just didn't really believe the whole Tyranid invasion situation, because no one seemed to be taking it very seriously, and the ending is the same no matter what. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with a linear story, but it definitely felt that the gameplay was doing most of the heavy lifting. This here is different though. The multiple endings, different story twists based on your in-mission choices, and further developed characters helped me to get quite a bit more invested, and subsequently I cared a lot more about what was going on. Speaking of, that leads us into the campaign presentation quite well. Now firstly, I know a significant number of you seem to disagree with me on thinking that the presentation quality of the original campaign in Dawn of War 2 was nothing to write home about, and that the absence of basically any cinematics, be they in-engine or pre-rendered, really worked against the characters and story that Relic was clearly trying to tell. I mean, they wrote and voiced a lot of dialogue. Even simple in-engine cutscenes like those seen in other Relic games would have been more than the bland and boring talking heads we ended up getting. I was hoping Chaos Rising would change this, even though I'd seen enough of it before playing to know that that wasn't the case. But even still, there are improvements here which, while small, do notably strengthen the story, characters, and player investment. To start, there's just more dialogue, and I don't necessarily mean more lines overall, but there are more chances to hear characters' thoughts on the current situation, and the option to probe characters with questions pre-mission, if you so desire. These opportunities are given throughout the game, primarily after missions and key events, and they also crop up before missions to find out about your next deployment, and perhaps glean some useful information from it. I'll admit, it's not a lot, and I do wish they'd gone further, perhaps maybe with a voiced protagonist or more chatter between multiple characters, not just them talking to you, but I still like it. I particularly liked getting squad members' opinions on the current goings-on, and hearing their perspective on the last mission or key event. It feels like a very rudimentary take on Mass Effect's talk to every squad member post-mission to hear their next lines of dialogue gameplay system. My favourite was hearing Thule berate me for straying too close to chaotic influence, and essentially having him threaten to crush me under the weight of his dreadnought if I went too far. And I think the spoken dialogue overall is just better here. I don't have any concrete comparisons or graphs or examples to bring up. It's just the vibe I got, it's how I felt. I was more invested, and hence I got more out of it. The campaign structure at its core is very similar to Dawn of War 2, with planet-hopping missions, the squad gear and leveling game, and a somewhat non-linear design. But thanks to the new enemy faction, the new playable character, the new war gear, and some new interesting mechanics, it's a clearly improved experience. The most dramatic impact comes from the previously mentioned Chaos influence. It aims to convey how much grip the Chaos Lords have over your individual Space Marines, and depending on how much you stray towards the darkness, it offers unique and powerful abilities to your squad that some would consider to be unnatural. There are of course consequences for heading down this path, with certain new items being locked away from use if you swing too far, or not far enough towards the Dark Gods, as well as the potential story ramifications that we talked about earlier. I love the extra layer of depth this mechanic brings. The potential abilities gained are significant, as are the chaos weapons that are made available, and the temptation is there for any player, especially those aiming for a fully pure playthrough. Though thankfully the holy weapons and armour made accessible to those doing so do help to alleviate that somewhat. Your choice of war gear can actually affect your chaos influence too, but that runs secondary to the main way to do it, which is making decisions and acting mid-mission. You'll be asked to do things like keep friendly troops alive, eliminate opposing commanders, destroy key structures, or not. Your choice to do or do not will add or subtract corruption, but only to the squads that are deployed at the time. So the game allows you to choose who is potentially steered in certain directions. Corruption? No corruption. Corruption? No corruption. Surely you wouldn't let those loyal Imperium troops die just to let Avitus gain a little more power. Would you? If you could change his fate, would ye? Corruption aside though, having multiple objectives that affect your squad's chaos influence is a great way to incentivize taking a detour from the main objective, and the mission design is much better because of it. Having secondary objectives that you actually want to do that aren't just there as an annoyance getting in the way of your next cutscene does go a really long way. Moving on to Jonah, having him as a new squad member is great too. Honestly, I didn't really expect him to make so much of an impact for me, considering we already have too many characters to deploy at once, but he became a pretty much permanent addition to my squad from the second he's introduced. The fact that he brings healing and defensive abilities while also being able to control mobs easily made him really useful to my usual team of the Force Commander, Thule and Thaddeus. Though I think in a hypothetical second playthrough I'd take more of a systematic approach, using Cyrus and Tarkus, rather than essentially having a gang of meatheads who just charge, slam, smash, or electrocute their way to the mission success screen. And don't get me wrong, that method is very enjoyable, but I think the build and gameplay diversity of Chaos Rising, and by extension Dawn of War 2, remains one of its biggest strengths. Your squad plays completely different depending on how their abilities and loadouts are spec'd, and combined with the already super enjoyable combat, it makes for a massively fun, but more importantly, hugely replayable campaign. There is still a lot of microing to be done, so if you weren't a fan of that in Dawn of War 2, then this won't change your mind, but you can still play the whole thing co-op with a friend if you'd rather lighten the load, or if you simply want to wipe the Chaos, Tyranid, Orc and Eldar scum with your best buddy. Now before we go on, I probably should say something negative, otherwise all the comments are going to say that I am either a shill or that my opinion sucks, or both if you're feeling creative. If you've seen my review of Dawn of War 2, then you can probably guess my main issue. If you guessed boss fights, then you're right. They are unchanged from the original, just big dumb bullet sponges that can erase your entire mission progress and force you to run through everything again if you're unlucky enough to get wiped. Thankfully, I didn't feel like these were as bad as they were before, which I think is down to the fact that I kind of knew what I was in for, so I always kept some revive kits ready to use, and spec'd my teams to either revive quickly or cheaply, or held a unit in reserve to bring people back from the brig if it came to that. Also, the number of reused maps in the campaign was a bit of a drag, it was kind of noticeable. Now, there are a couple of new biomes which are pretty great. I really liked the Space Hulk, with its really tight corridors and really claustrophobic atmosphere, and these were certainly needed and they're very welcome. But there are more than a few straight up lift and shift maps from Dawn of War 2 in the campaign, which tend to take some of the wind out of my sails when I realised what I was in for. Thankfully they're not everywhere, and there are a decent number of new maps to see, though it's not a big deal, and some of those original maps have been edited, but Relic, I swear to God, if you make me deploy to Angel Gate and Retribution, I'm going to get Steam to completely remove the entire Dawn of War collection from my account. And now a quick note here on Skirmish to cap things off. My opinions on it really haven't changed since I played Dawn of War 2, so again, go and watch that video if you're interested. I have put a bit more time into it, and I do understand the argument some people made in the comments for why it's actually a great mode, especially with friends. Look, I just don't think it's for me. It's clearly a superior PvP mode than a co-op one, and that just doesn't mean much for me, as I've always preferred the latter and not the former. I am not a PvP player. To be frank, I just suck, and I don't like losing time and time again. Again, watch the Dawn of War 2 review for some more insight, but the too long didn't watch is that I'll be sticking with Dark Crusade for my co-op 40k RTS fix for the foreseeable future. Alright, now are you a fan of The Last Stand? If so, I'm really sorry. I'm gonna have to bait you one more time. I know in the last video I said I would review it here, but due to some technical and scheduling reasons, and the fact that no one plays it online, I'm going to have to wait until I review Retribution to give it its time in the spotlight. Look, for real this time, I promise. Look, see, I even have gameplay recorded and ready to go. Not long now, once we talk Retribution, we will talk The Last Stand. But hey, sound off in the comments if you'd like to start any discussions now. I definitely have some thoughts on the mode and I'd be interested to hear on what you think, and maybe I'll talk about some of it in the review. I'll see you down there. I've got to admit, when I sat down to play Chaos Rising 5 months ago, after finishing Dawn of War 2, I wasn't really frothing at the mouth to get started. That may be why this video took nearly half a year to release, when I mentioned it about 10,000 times in that original review. But man, I don't know exactly what it was, but within 15 minutes of deploying on Aurelia, it felt like I'd just come back home. I was having an absolute blast. It's like I didn't know what I'd been missing until I experienced it again. The deploy, shoot, rearm, and deploy again loop has a lot of legs here, and I'd be more than happy to sit down with another playthrough of Chaos Rising if I had the time. Relic clearly knew what they were doing here, and they had certainly been on a roll at the time of Chaos Rising's release. Earlier the year after, Relic closed off Dawn of War with Retribution. And not only would that be the last expansion to Dawn of War 2, but it would also be the last entry in the series before the near universally maligned, and so far, last sequel. But regardless of what terrors I may be in for when that time comes, we can still enjoy what we have available now, and take solace in the fact that no matter what happens to our most beloved series in the future, they can't be taken away from us. Unless you want to play Ubisoft games, in which case it seems like you can't enjoy that. If in chat, boys. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like and subscribing if you'd like to see more from me in the future. And, of course, hit the bell if you want to be notified as soon as my reviews of Dawn of War 2 Retribution, Dawn of War 3, and more go live. And if you really like what I do here, then you can throw me a few bucks either here on YouTube or by becoming a member on Patreon. You'll join legends like T-Edits, Crispy Robo Chicken, Aero, Crizzy218, George Rain, Jack Walsh, Jacob Masick, Nutty Jawa, Overlord Jebus, David DeBolgi, Dekayo, and Standby for Systems Nominal. Of course, legend that he is, Paladin tier, thank you very much. And welcome to Christian, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, to this category. Thanks very much. Thank you all very much for watching. It was great to have this video out the door, and I will see you all next time.